Hello, everybody. We are Bali Moms on the Go. I am Robin, and this is my friend Sonia. We today are going to talk about ego. We've sort of brought it up a little bit in some of our other videos back when we talked about conscious subconscious, and also what was the other one, Sonia, that we talked about?
I think when we talk about the morning routines and the
Oh,
struggle that parents can have.
Yeah, so we brought it up on that day as well. So, but we really only just brushed the surface on that topic. So we really wanted to sort of dig in to what our idea of ego is and how it affects our day-to-day, but also how it affects sort of our long-term mood, how well we're caring for ourselves.
Yes. So when we talk about ego, some people can have different definition of ego. I know that the traditional psychology will define ego as part of a basic impulse in us and just like one part of us. And we are not going to refer to that. We're going to refer to a more conscious perspective, like wisdom tradition, as some will call it, where the ego could be different persona that we have and we face when we face different situations.
Yeah, it's sort of like our we talked about in our subconscious, it's the reactions that are coming from that subconscious mind. It's how we are responding, how we are reacting from our subconscious mind. And I do like to think of it, just like you said, as like multiple personalities. You know, we have our angry self, we have our frustrated self, and we know which of those selves we feel most comfortable in. And unfortunately, sometimes if we hold on to something for too long, like frustration or anger, it actually does have this sort of comfort to it because there is a defensiveness, a sort of a block there where we can keep people away. And sometimes we sort of wrap ourselves up in that like a blanket. But we know in our conscious mind that it isn't serving us. It isn't doing us any good at all.
Yeah. So I like an example of the ego and the human being. So picture like a little chick in the little egg. So the chick is us growing in this egg, and the egg is like the ego. So at some point we know that we need this ego to survive and grow, especially when we're little, because we're exposed to so many things. But these eggs absorb still. So the ego is still protective, but at some point this chick has to break the shell to like really grow as adults and be the best version of ourselves. And if you don't crack the shell, if you don't crack that ego, and then imagine all the pieces of the shell at the different persona. If you don't crack all those pieces, you're not gonna survive, because you have to like crack and then be the person. And so yeah, I really like this example because you can really see like you need that, but at some point you need to evolve as your own self.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That's really good. One that I learned that I really connect to is a labeling technique. And so we sort of come to a place where we recognize that this is not our best self, and we actually give it a name. And this works really well with children because it gives them an opportunity to, it's almost like a game where they get to recognize their feelings, and they get to put a name on it. So frustrated Frida, angry Alan, annoyed Alice. But with kids, what parents sometimes make a mistake with this labeling technique is that they label it for their children, but that's not how it works. The child has to do it for themselves. So once the moment is over, because when you're in ego, when it's flaring, this is not the time to say, okay, let's talk about our feelings, because in that moment, that's the last thing that you want to do as an adult. That's the last thing that child wants to do as well. So afterwards, it's really nice when there's a calm moment to sit down with the child and say to them, you remember when, right? And then you can talk about what happened, how they felt, and then give them the opportunity to name it. So my son, for example, my youngest son, he's a pretty easygoing guy most of the time, but his most prominent ego role is cranky. And so, you know, we talk about it, and I let him name it, and he named it so silly, right? Like, I was thinking he would name it like Cranky Carl or Cranky, you know, like a regular name, but he didn't. He was like Cranky Curmudgeonfuffin. And so that was his name. And so then we could use that when he felt that coming on. You know, I could say to him, oh, is Cranky Curmudgeonfuffin kind of coming through? And he would say, oh, yes, yes. And just that recognition of that feeling allows us to have more control over it.
Oh, yeah. I think it's based also on the coming back to presence. Like the ego push you like to a place where it's all in your face, and the ego is rising with all the emotion, negative emotion you may have, like frustration, anger, sadness, disappointment, all that is rising. So you're less present. You're just like in the flow of all this overwhelming situation.
Yeah.
And then when you relate to something like all this nice name about cranky, I don't know, all the names.
Curmudgeonfuffin.
Yeah. So all that is like you refer to, it's like, oh yeah, I realize that it's something, and you go back to the consciousness, to the more presence. It's like, okay, and you realize it's like, okay, there is something to deal, and then what's the need, what's happening. So it's really coming back to presence.
That subconscious, conscious mind that we talked about in that previous video. So be sure to watch that one and this one together, because the two of those things come really close together, where we are taking the awareness away from the subconscious and into the conscious mind, because there is where we can make a better decision.
Mm-hmm. So one key also element about ego is really to understand the emotions and to name the emotion as a parent, and also to teach the child to learn more about the emotions. And that's something that we tend not to have at school, or like sometimes like stop shouting, stop screaming, and then they don't really recognize the emotion. Like I feel frustrated, and the child might, because he's frustrated, because maybe the child cannot really understand an exercise, and then he will just like suddenly feel like super disturbing and like chatty because this kind of thing. But maybe the teacher will just like stop the child straight away. It's like, stop doing that, and then he won't have the recognition of his own feelings. Like he didn't realize that he was frustrating at on the first part.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of putting a Band-Aid on things, or dealing with a symptom, not the actual, the challenge. And of course, you know, in a situation with parents and teachers, we are often not so much in the moment ourselves. We're trying to progress and move on to that next thing. And that's what we were talking about in the morning routine video. Yes. Is we're so far ahead of that moment that we're not taking the time with our children to say, hey, why is this tantrum occurring, and what is that feeling stemming from? And we may not be able to do it right then, but it's important later to really reflect back. And you can do this for yourself. If you have a moment where you're just like acting out, because we act out too as adults, we just call it something else, right? So if you're acting out as an adult, later when you're calm, take a moment to reflect back to what happened there. And like this morning, I was cranky because the weather was so poor again. I'm just like, oh, I can't take it anymore. And I got in my vehicle and I pushed the gas too hard because I was already frustrated with the weather, and I actually almost hit another vehicle because it was slippery. But that came from me just being cranky about the weather and just sort of being in my little and so I was like and I pushed the gas pedal, right? So this sort of reactive behavior almost never comes out positive. You know, but don't get us wrong, because ego is also happy, and ego is also joyous, and ego is also, you know, genuine and pure as well. We're just sort of focusing on the part that doesn't serve us.
Yeah. So I like to see, so when you recognize the ego rising, and then I like to encourage the person I'm working with to name the emotions I feel, and then recognize what's the needs. Like, okay, like for instance, you felt frustrated this morning because of the weather. So I felt frustrated. And then what's your needs? Like, I need like warm weather, like I'm just done. Then when you formalize it, just helping you go back to like the present moment again, and bring back the consciousness and be aware about, okay, this situation, and then just like calm the situation and not have this ego continue and burst and grow and grow and grow and grow. Right. So I like to like recognize feeling, what you feel, what you need, and then if there is any request, like Mother Nature, please send us some warm sun.
Yeah. And one of my coaches also actually had us at one point journaling alongside with your feelings and your thoughts in that moment, but also any physical reactions that you have. Because sometimes a lot of our illness or our injury is stemming from a sort of chronic egoic reaction.
Oh yes, totally. I totally agree.
Yeah.
So yeah. So tell us in the comments. What are you feeling about ego? Is it something new for you, or you're already like familiar with ego? And then how do you deal with your ego? Do you have any tips, any advice about how you deal with ego?
Yeah, we want you guys to share your ideas with us as well, because your experience is going to benefit somebody else. So we're sharing our experience with you in hopes that it will benefit you, but we want you to share yours to benefit others as well. As a community, we can do that together.
Yes.
Share, like, say, what else? Comment.
Comments and
Yeah.
subscribe.
And subscribe. That's the word I was looking for.
And also join our fabulous community of women and moms on the Facebook group.
Yes, all of this is in the comments below, so take a look. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.